Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're exploring a research paper that really caught my eye. It's called Governance and Poverty. Does good governance play a role in alleviating poverty?
It's a fascinating question, isn't it? So often we focus on economic growth as the key to tackling poverty, but this paper suggests we might be missing a crucial piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, it seems intuitive that a thriving economy would lead to less poverty. But this research digs a little deeper, exploring whether how a government functions can actually impact its ability to lift people out of poverty, even if the economy is growing.
Exactly. It's not just about how big the pie is, but also about how that pie is sliced and who gets a piece. And they use a really interesting case study to explore
Oh
this.
yeah, China and India, right? Two economic powerhouses that have taken quite different paths over the past few decades.
You got it. Both countries have made significant strides in reducing poverty, but their stories highlight some pretty surprising findings. The researcher actually starts by confirming what a lot of us might assume, that there's a strong link between economic growth and poverty reduction, but then they get into the really interesting stuff.
Okay, so they found a connection, but it's not the whole story. Lay it on me. What makes China and India such a good comparison?
Well, despite both experiencing substantial economic growth, China saw a much more dramatic and consistent drop in poverty compared to India.
So it wasn't just about how much their economies grew, but more about the specifics of that growth.
Exactly. Think of it this way. If economic growth is the fuel, then effective governance is the engine that makes the car go. The paper argues that China's approach was more targeted, more strategic. They really focused on rapid industrialization and urbanization. This created a huge wave of new jobs, especially in what we call secondary industries, manufacturing, and tertiary industries, those service sector jobs.
Well, that's interesting. So it's not just about creating any jobs. It's about creating the right kind of jobs in the right sectors where they can really make a difference.
Right. And this is where the power of data visualization really shines. The researchers use tools like linear regressions to show the stark contrast in poverty trends between the two countries.
It's like those visuals help tell a story that just numbers alone couldn't capture. A graph can sometimes make a point more powerfully than a whole paragraph, right?
Absolutely. A picture's worth 1,000 words, as they say. And those visuals really help bring the data to life. But the paper goes even deeper than that. It suggests that China's success wasn't just about strategic economic choices.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. Tell me more. What else did they find?
Well, they argue that a big part of the story is government effectiveness. They use data from the World Bank's governance indicators, which basically measure things like accountability, regulatory quality, and control of corruption. They're really trying to capture how well a government functions.
And what did they find? How did China and India compare on these indicators?
What's fascinating is that China consistently scored higher than India, particularly after 2006.
Hmm. So the data seems to suggest that China wasn't just focusing on the right kind of economic growth, but they also had a more effective government in place to, actually implement their policies and make sure things were moving in the right direction.
Exactly. And that's what makes this research so compelling. It's not just about economic growth, it's about the interplay between growth and government effectiveness. It's about recognizing that even when economies are growing, a well-functioning government can make a huge difference in the fight against poverty.
Wow. This is already giving me a lot to think about. We've talked about economic growth, strategic job creation, and the role of government effectiveness. But I'm curious about how the researcher managed to tell such a compelling story using data. It doesn't sound like they were just throwing numbers at us.
You're absolutely right. They were using data storytelling to weave together a narrative that's both informative and engaging.
Can you give us an example of that? I'm always fascinated by how researchers can take something as, seemingly dry as data and make it so captivating.
Absolutely. One of the techniques they used was a really simple but effective visual representation of China's targeted approach. Imagine a graph, okay? On one axis, you have time. On the other, you have the percentage of people living below the poverty line. For India, you might see a gradual decline, a slow and steady improvement. But for China, the line drops dramatically, almost like a steep slide. That visual immediately grabs your attention and makes the difference in their trajectories crystal clear.
That's a great way to bring the data to life. You can almost see China's poverty rate plummeting. It's much more impactful than just saying, oh, China's poverty rate decreased faster than India's.
Exactly. That's the power of data storytelling. It's about using visuals, narratives, and insights to make data more accessible, engaging, and ultimately more impactful. It's about turning data into a tool for change, especially when it comes to tackling a global challenge like poverty.
Yeah, it's not just about presenting a bunch of dry statistics. It's about painting a picture, telling a story that resonates with people and makes them want to learn more and maybe even get involved.
Absolutely. Data storytelling helps us see patterns, understand complex relationships, and make informed decisions. And when we're talking about something as important as poverty, that ability to connect with people and inspire action is crucial.
This is all so fascinating. But before we get too carried away, I know that good research always acknowledges its limitations. What did this paper point to as areas for further investigation?
That's a great question. They acknowledge that there's still a lot to learn, particularly when it comes to the influence of political ideology. They suggest that exploring how different political systems and ideologies play out in different countries could be a valuable area for future research.
That makes sense. Political ideology can be such a complex factor with so many different nuances. It'd be interesting to see how that plays out in different contexts.
Exactly. And they also highlighted the importance of examining variations within countries, especially in a place like India, where individual states have a significant degree of autonomy.
Oh. So while this research gives us some valuable insights, it's really just scratching the surface. There's a whole universe of data out there waiting to be explored to tell even richer, more nuanced stories about poverty and how to address it.
I couldn't agree more. And that's what makes this field so exciting. There's always more to learn, and data is a powerful tool that can help us on that journey.
This is a great start to our deep dive. In the next part, let's dig even deeper into the specifics of China and India's approaches and see what lessons we can learn from their experiences.
Sounds good. We'll unpack those details and see what other insights we can uncover. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to our deep dive into data storytelling and how it can shed light on the complexities of poverty alleviation.
It's amazing what we can learn when we dig into the data, isn't it? Last time, we were talking about how China's approach to economic growth seemed to play a key role in their success in reducing poverty. Yeah, and the fact that they really focused on creating specific types of jobs in industries where they could have the biggest impact.
Exactly. But it wasn't just about economic factors, right? We also touched on the idea of political ideology, and I'm curious to explore that a bit further.
You're right. The research does acknowledge that political ideology can influence how countries approach poverty reduction, but it's definitely a complex area.
Yeah, I mean, are they suggesting that certain political ideologies are just better at tackling poverty? It seems like that could get pretty controversial.
Not really. The paper is actually advocating for a more nuanced understanding of how political ideology plays out in different contexts.
So it's not about labeling one ideology as good or bad, but rather recognizing that those ideologies can manifest in very different ways, depending on the country and its unique circumstances.
Exactly. It's about looking beyond those labels and digging into the specifics. How are those ideologies shaping the government's approach to social welfare programs? How do they influence investments in healthcare and education? Those are the kinds of questions we need to be asking.
That makes sense. It's about moving beyond generalizations and understanding how those ideologies actually play out in practice.
Precisely. And I think data storytelling can play a really important role here. Instead of getting bogged down in abstract debates about ideology, we can use data to see how those beliefs are actually being translated into policies and actions on the ground.
So data can help us ground those ideological discussions in reality and see what's actually happening in the real world.
Exactly. It can help us move beyond those simplistic assumptions and get a clearer picture of what's working and what's not. But I think it's important to circle back to that central argument in the paper about government
Oh
effectiveness.
yeah, that was a key takeaway. What were some of the specific aspects of governance that they highlighted as being particularly important for poverty reduction?
Well, they really emphasized a government's ability to effectively implement its policies. It's kind of like having a well-designed blueprint for a house. You can have the most beautiful plans in the world, but if you don't have skilled builders who can actually construct it properly, it's all for nothing.
I like that analogy. You need both the vision and the capacity to execute it. So what are some of the signs that a government is effective in this way? What should we be looking for?
Well, a few things come to mind. For one, a competent bureaucracy. You need qualified, motivated people working in the government who can actually carry out those policies effectively.
It's like having a team of skilled engineers making sure that bridge is built to last.
Exactly. And you also need transparent decision-making processes. If everything's happening behind closed doors, it's much harder to hold leaders accountable and ensure that resources are being used wisely.
Transparency helps build trust.
Right.
It allows people to see what's happening and feel like they're part of the process.
Absolutely. And finally, strong accountability mechanisms are essential. There need to be ways to track how funds are being spent, to measure the impact of programs, and to identify areas where things aren't working as well as they could be.
Accountability is so important, especially when we're talking about issues like poverty.
Mm.
We need to make sure those resources are actually reaching the people who need them most, and that those policies are having the intended effect.
Precisely. And of course, data plays a crucial role in all of this. It's not just about warm, fuzzy feelings. It's about using data to track progress, identify challenges, and make those necessary course corrections along the way.
So data helps us move beyond good intentions and actually make a real difference in people's lives.
Exactly. And that brings us back to this idea of data storytelling. It's not just about presenting a bunch of numbers and statistics. It's about using those numbers to communicate effectively, to gauge people's emotions, and ultimately to inspire action.
It's about weaving a narrative, telling a story that resonates with people and motivates them to get involved.
I like to think of it as translating data from the language of numbers to the language of human experience. We need to connect with people's hearts as well as their minds if we want to create lasting change.
That's a really beautiful way to put it. So when we're talking about something like poverty alleviation, that might mean sharing stories that capture the real struggles, resilience, and hopes of people living in poverty, and showing how effective governance can make a difference in their lives.
You've hit the nail on the head. Data storytelling can be a powerful tool for advocacy, for raising awareness, and for driving policy changes that improve people's lives. But I think it's important to acknowledge that there can also be downsides, There are risks to consider.
That's a great point. We need to be mindful of how data is collected, analyzed, and presented. It's easy to fall into the trap of oversimplifying complex issues or even unintentionally reinforcing existing biases.
Exactly. I think one of the biggest risks is oversimplification. Trying to fit those complex realities into neat little narratives can actually distort the picture and lead to misleading conclusions. It's important to acknowledge the nuances and avoid presenting data as a simple solution to what is often a very complex problem.
Yeah, it's about finding that balance between telling a compelling story and staying true to the complexity of the data.
Exactly. We also need to be really aware of the potential for bias, both conscious and unconscious. The way we choose to present data can reflect our own perspectives and priorities. We need to be asking ourselves whose voices are being represented, whose perspectives are missing from this story.
That's such an important point. We need to make sure that data storytelling is being used to empower those most affected by poverty, not to speak for them or impose external narratives on their experiences.
I couldn't agree more. And finally, I think we need to be wary of what I call the data fetish. Sometimes there's this tendency to believe that data alone can solve all of our problems.
So it's about recognizing that data is a powerful tool, but it's just one piece of the puzzle. We need to combine those data insights with human empathy, with political will, and with community engagement to create lasting solutions.
Precisely. Data storytelling can be a force for good, but it's essential to use it responsibly, ethically, and with a deep understanding of its potential limitations.
This conversation has been so insightful. We've explored the power of data storytelling to illuminate complex issues like poverty, but we've also talked about some of the potential pitfalls to be aware of. But before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I'm curious to get your thoughts on something specific that the paper mentioned. They briefly touched on India's decentralized political structure and how that might impact their poverty reduction efforts. What are your thoughts on that?
That's a really interesting point. India's system, where states have a significant degree of autonomy, presents both unique challenges and opportunities when it comes to poverty reduction.
It seems like it could be a double-edged sword. On the one hand, states have the flexibility to tailor their approaches to meet local needs. But on the other hand, it could be harder to implement national policies consistently and effectively.
You've hit the nail on the head. That decentralization can make it tricky to assess the overall effectiveness of governance on poverty reduction at a national level. Imagine trying to measure the average temperature of a house where each room has its own thermostat. It's not as straightforward as taking one reading.
That's a great analogy. So it sounds like we need to zoom in and look at each state individually to really understand how governance is influencing poverty reduction in India.
Exactly. And that's where more granular state-level analysis becomes really crucial. By examining those specific contexts, we can gain a much more nuanced understanding of what factors are driving success in different parts of the country.
It seems like this deep dive is really challenging us to move beyond those simplistic generalizations and embrace the complexity of poverty alleviation.
Absolutely. And that's one of the most valuable things about data storytelling. It can help us break down those preconceived notions and illuminate those multifaceted realities of poverty and development.
I'm really looking forward to exploring those nuances further in the next part of our deep dive.
Me too. We'll delve into the paper's specific findings on China and India, examine their contrasting approaches, and uncover the valuable lessons we can learn from their experiences.
Welcome back. It's time for the final part of our deep dive into this fascinating research on governance and poverty.
We've explored a lot of ground so far, haven't we?
Yeah.
From the power of data storytelling to the complexities of political ideology.
Yeah, and now it's time to really get into the heart of the matter. The comparison between China and India.
Right, these two economic powerhouses that have taken such different paths, and what their stories can teach us about the crucial role of effective governance in reducing poverty.
Okay, so let's dive into those specifics. What did the data reveal about how China and India's approaches played out in the real world?
Well, the data shows a really striking difference in their trajectories. Despite both experiencing significant economic growth over the past few decades, China saw a much steeper and more consistent decline in poverty rates.
Yeah, we've touched on that before, but I'm still curious about the why. Was it simply a case of China's economy growing faster?
It's a bit more nuanced than that. You see, the researcher really emphasizes that it's not just about the speed of growth, but the direction of that growth. It's about creating the right kinds of economic opportunities, the kinds that can truly help people lift themselves out of poverty.
So are you saying that China's approach was more strategic? Like they weren't just aiming for growth in general, but were targeting specific sectors that had the potential to make a real difference.
Exactly. They prioritize rapid industrialization, pouring investments into manufacturing, and creating a huge surge in factory jobs. This shift from agriculture to industry was a key driver of poverty reduction in China.
It's like they understood that creating the right jobs in the right sectors was absolutely crucial.
Right. And it's important to note that the Chinese government played a significant role in orchestrating this transformation. They were actively involved in directing resources to those key industries and making sure the policies were in place to support that growth.
Ah, so it wasn't just about setting the right economic course. It was also about having a government that could effectively steer the ship, navigate the challenges, and make sure those benefits were reaching the people who needed them most.
Exactly. And that's where those World Bank governance indicators we talked about earlier become so important. The data shows that China consistently outperformed India in areas like government effectiveness, regulatory quality, and control of corruption.
Wow, that's a pretty clear indication that effective governance can be a real game changer, especially when it comes to translating economic growth into tangible improvements in people's lives. And it really highlights the power of data visualization, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The researcher actually used some very effective visuals to bring this contrast to life. Imagine a graph, okay? It shows the percentage of people living below the poverty line in both China and India over time. India's line is gradually trending downwards, but China's line takes a dramatic plunge, a steep drop that's really hard to ignore.
Yeah, that visual would definitely make a strong impact. It's a much more powerful way to communicate that difference than just saying, oh, China's poverty rate decreased faster. It really drives home the point that government effectiveness can make a huge difference. But I'm curious, what were some of the specific policies or programs that contributed to China's success in this area?
Well, the paper highlights a few key things. One was a massive investment in rural infrastructure. They really focused on improving transportation, communication networks, and access to markets, which helped boost agricultural productivity and connect those rural communities to economic opportunities.
So they were really laying the groundwork for sustainable growth by creating an environment where people could more easily participate in the economy.
Right. And they didn't stop there. They also implemented targeted social welfare programs to provide direct support to those who needed it most. These programs acted as a safety net, helping to prevent people from falling deeper into poverty and giving them a bit of a buffer during those tough times.
It sounds like a pretty balanced approach. combining long-term investments in development with immediate support for those struggling to make ends meet.
Exactly. And they also made significant investments in education and healthcare, recognizing that a healthy and educated population is essential for long-term progress. By giving people those essential tools, they were investing in their potential, giving them the chance to create a better future for themselves and their families.
That's fantastic. It sounds like China really adopted a multifaceted approach, combining economic growth with smart policies, targeted programs, and a real focus on empowering people. And the data seems to suggest that this approach has played a major role in their impressive progress on poverty reduction.
It really has, and I think their story is incredibly inspiring. It's a testament to what can be achieved when governments prioritize effective governance and invest in their people.
It's a powerful reminder that data can be so much more than just numbers on a page. It can be a tool for understanding complex issues, for identifying solutions, and for telling compelling stories that inspire action.
Absolutely. And I think it's our responsibility to share these data-driven stories, to shed light on what's working so that others can learn, adapt, and hopefully replicate those successes in their own contexts.
You're so right. But it's also important to remember that there's no one-size-fits-all solution. Every country is unique, and what works in China might not work somewhere else. This research just underscores the importance of ongoing exploration, of continuing to ask those tough questions, and of using data to help us better understand the complex factors that contribute to poverty and how to address it effectively.
I couldn't agree more. And that's where data storytelling continues to play such a vital role. By using data to illuminate the intricacies of these issues, we can start to move beyond those simplistic solutions and work toward more nuanced, effective, and equitable approaches to poverty alleviation.
This deep dive has been an incredible journey, and I feel like I've learned so much. It's challenged our assumptions, highlighted the importance of good governance, and shown us the power of data to tell compelling stories that can inspire real change.
I hope you feel the same way. And I hope this has encouraged you to think critically about how data can be used to address the challenges we face, both locally and globally. It's a powerful tool, and it's up to all of us to use it wisely and ethically to create a better future for everyone.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating world of data storytelling and poverty alleviation. We've covered a lot of ground, and I hope you found it as insightful and thought-provoking as I have.
And remember, the quest for knowledge and understanding never ends. So keep exploring, keep asking those tough questions, and keep using data to illuminate the path toward a more just and equitable world for all.